Morning. Pat Sheridan with FireEye, run the federal team here. Thank you for coming today. And they listened to me backstage there. They were going to have Bruno Mars, Uptown Funk as I walk up. Thank you for not doing that. So we've got a great day lined up today. Can't thank you enough for showing up here today. Whether you came here from Tokyo, London, Sydney, San Francisco, Atlanta, North Dakota. Anyone from North Dakota? Okay. Nope. Okay, no one made it from North Dakota. Or if you came here from Chantilly and you braved the roads this morning, which I don't think were that bad, thank you very much. So we've got, I don't know if many of you knew this, but they moved up the Cherry Blossom Festival to today. So while you're in town, don't leave until 4:30 after the events, but you can go check this out. I think Sabrina walked over and took this photo yesterday in her 3-inch stilettos, braving. So thank you, Sabrina. And if you didn't, I don't know who took it, but thank you. But seriously, we've got some great things lined up today. Since our last forum about a year ago, we've got a new administration in town, as everybody knows. One that's very different than I think a lot of the previous ones, but in terms of things like mindset, priorities, and structure. However, it appears that the goals with respect to cybersecurity are consistent with what we've seen from previous administrations as well. Protect the American people from cyber threats, from state actors, work with and support privately owned critical infrastructure in defensive efforts, collaborate with the private sector to utilize advanced technologies, and increase defense spending. We assume will include additional cyber resources. So working with our government partners and industry partners, we put together a great agenda today. It looks like this. Starting in a few moments, we'll begin with our first morning keynote, Kevin Mandia, FireEye CEO. At 9:45 after the morning keynotes, we'll have a half-hour networking break. At 10:15, we have an incredible CISO panel moderated by Tony Cole, FireEye's Vice President, Global Government CTO. We've got folks from NGA, Social Security Administration, Department of Defense, and the District of Columbia, so very well represented panelists on the panel this morning. Following the panel, we'll have a look at enhanced national cybersecurity and improving critical infrastructure from Rear Admiral Perez, U.S. Navy retired, who's currently managing director at SBD Advisors. After that, we'll break for lunch at 11:30. Speaking of our partners, by the way, I do want to put a shout out to Carasoft and Lieberman Software being our platinum sponsors. We've got ClearShark and Forescout as our gold sponsors. F5, FCN, Gigamon, PCMG, thank you very much for being our silver sponsors. And we've got a lot of great partners who, without each one of them, we wouldn't be able to put on this event today. So please take time, go into the exhibitor showcase, and learn from some of our industry partners, some of the technology experts. We'd really appreciate that. Right after lunch, I'd ask if we could be, if everyone could get back and seated by 12 o'clock because we've got a great schedule lined up in the afternoon, starting with U.S. Navy Rear Admiral Gene Price, Deputy Commander, U.S. Fleet Cyber Command, U.S. 10th Fleet. At 12:30, we'll then have U.S. Senator Mark Warner from the Commonwealth of Virginia speak to us and give us his perspective on the Hill. At 1 p.m., we're going to go into 3 sessions, 3 breakout sessions, cyber threat intelligence. The second track is readiness and response, and then current trends in the cyber threatscape. So great event lined up today. We've got leaders and experts across organizations like I just mentioned, also Health and Human Services, EPA, Defense Intelligence Agency, NIST, and from industry partners like Butts Along, Lieberman Software, National Core Technology, and obviously FireEye. So after the breakouts, if I could just ask everyone to come back here and for some closing remarks at 2:30. And we'll recap what we learned with Kevin Mandia back in the room then, and followed by our annual networking reception from 3 to 4:30. So now, I'm pleased to introduce the first keynote, Kevin Mandia. I've had the pleasure of knowing Kevin for several years now. It's really a blessing to be able to have a leader out in Silicon Valley that comes out of government, that understands government. I don't have to translate. A lot of my peers that do what I do, they have to deal with CEOs who don't know how to invest in government, don't know how to speak to government, don't understand the mission. You're going to find out shortly, if you haven't heard Kevin speak, he understands government firsthand. Kevin has served as FireEye's Chief Executive Officer since last June and was appointed to the company's board of directors earlier last year. He was previously president of FireEye from 2015 until June 2016. Kevin joined FireEye as Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer in December 2013 when FireEye acquired Mandiant, the company he founded back in 2004. Before Mandiant, Kevin was the Director of Computer Forensics at Foundstone from 2000 to 2003 and the Director of Information Security at Cytex from 1998 to 2000. Kevin has also served as an officer in the United States Air Force, where he was a computer security officer in the 7th Communications Group at the Pentagon and a special agent of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He graduated with a bachelor's degree in computer science from Lafayette College and a master's in forensic science from the George Washington University. Neither of those two schools did make it to the big dance. Sorry, Kevin, wherever you are. But I know he's not sticking around later. George Washington is playing in the college basketball invitational tonight at 7 o'clock against Toledo. Sorry you're going to miss that, but anyhow, let's welcome Kevin Mandia to the stage.
Thank you. I like this. I picked the wrong side of the stage there. No stairs. Thank you, Pat.
Okay.
I appreciate this. And yes, all my speeches are written on hotel documents. So I'm told I have 9 minutes and 11 seconds. I'll be faster than that. No, I got 30 minutes. You know, first thing I want to do is say thank you to the folks that are playing defense in cybersecurity. I think back to my first job ever after college as a computer science major coming out of a small school called Lafayette. And at Lafayette, by the way, I tried to play football, but I was too small and too slow. Remarkable combination for football. And in my junior year, I remember going from football to trying to play lacrosse. And an interesting thing happens in lacrosse. There's a goalie in lacrosse, and it's a tough job because basically balls are coming at you at about 90 miles an hour, and you wear this tiny little vest that protects you. And I remember, you know, later on when I saw our goalie pull off his shirt, he'd have like 9 big welts on his chest because he was playing goalie. And that's how I feel we, as security professionals, get to deal with those same bruises. We're playing goalie in cyberspace, and on a good day, nothing happens, and no news is good news in security. And then the only time your boss learns your name, if you're a CISO, is when something bad happens or you're fighting or chasing compliance. So I want to say thank you first and foremost to everyone in here who's playing goalie. We can't win when you're a goalie, right? You essentially, sooner or later, a puck gets in the net or a ball gets in the net, and it's a thankless job, but it's an important one. But I'll talk about ways we can do the best we can and how we can educate our leaders to make sure that we're better postured to be victorious. So I also want to thank the folks that allow me to represent them at FireEye. We created technology that all our consultants use. So I want to thank the folks who build the technology. I want to thank the folks that respond to breaches. I'm less than 48 hours removed from being on the phone with some of our frontline responders, and we're at capacity. We have over 300 people right now, full bore, trying to figure out what happened and what to do about it at security breaches. And we have some major breaches where we don't even, you know, we have 2 or 3 guys working it when we should have about 8 to 10. So that just tells you the threat landscape against organizations worldwide. In particular, we're fully booked here in the United States. So I want to thank the responders, and then I want to thank the people that support them. It is an absolute privilege to be able to represent that. And yes, I do read all our forensic reports. I can't help myself. They're 86 pages long. They get pretty dry after the executive summary, but you got to do it. Plus, I fly enough that I have plenty of reading time. So I wanted to say thank you, and then I went back to 2004 in this slide. A security gap exists. I remember when I started Mandiant, it was in Old Town Alexandria at that Starbucks right by the water. And I was sitting there going, I'm incorrigible, unmanageable, single, and I'm ready to take all my money and burn it. You know, you got to have that attitude when you start a company. You're ready to go down to zero, and you're ready to make something happen. And I remember I wrote down there was 3 things that were core to Mandiant. It was security gap always exists. You cannot solely rely on preventive measures. Security breaches are inevitable. And then I realized all 3 of those things are the exact same thing. So I chose one, and we put it on the website. Security breaches are inevitable, and it was wildly unpopular. Nobody really got it. But I want to tell you that security breaches are inevitable, and we're witnessing it, and I've got about 10 reasons why, but I'm not going to go through them all. But first and foremost, there's absolutely no risk or repercussions to hacking us. None whatsoever. If you're in North Korea, if you're in Iran, if you're in China, if you're in Russia, if you're somewhere in Africa probably where the infrastructure doesn't allow us to pierce anonymity, you get a freebie. You get a hall pass. The anonymity of the internet, big thumbs up for bad guys. They can just wantonly attack the heck out of us. Second thing, and you know, we just published our M-Trends report, so we'll have some numbers on this, but when you look at how people are breaking in, there are a lot of nerds out there that'll say people are hacking systems. Not really. What they're doing is exploiting human trust. When we look at the majority of the breaches we respond to, over 90% of them, victim zero, there's a spearfish. We have an architecture or an infrastructure, this thing called the internet, where human communications is riding the exact same pipes as the command and control of utilities, the command and control of video, media, everything. It's fascinating. But because there's human communications on the internet, there's always going to be vulnerability. You can always dupe somebody into doing something, and we're not going to be able to patch that. So first, no risk or repercussions to folks that are trying to hack us. Second, the exploitation is human trust, not computer systems. That's a challenge. People will always be vulnerable to other humans trying to dupe them into doing something. Third, first to market beats secure to market. And I'm not beating up vendors. We have to innovate. We're the most innovative country in the world when it comes to software. But a lot of times when you look at who's developing this software, they're often thinking, we've got to create better software to control your thermostat at home. But they're not thinking, how do we secure it? What are the protocols for identity? What are the command and control protocols for the infrastructure we need to have the Internet of Things and other devices? I'm pretty sure when you talk to your refrigerator, and it can listen, it can hear, it can process, it can analyze, and it can order you your next steak, it's not built with a ton of security in it. I also don't think that's going to lead to the downfall of mankind, but it's not going to have security in it. And I have 10 more reasons, but I'll just leave it with this. We don't have rules of engagement. When you look at the nations that are out there, every nation's modernizing their offensive capability. Whenever I travel to the Middle East and meet representatives of sovereign nations, in under 5 minutes, the conversation turns to either A, how can we monitor our own citizens surreptitiously, or B, how can we get an offensive capability and exploit development capability and go on the offense? And they always want to know what everybody else is up to. These geopolitical conditions are always going to be kind of ebb and flow. And what I learned after 20-something years of responding to computer security breaches is, in fact, the early warning system for geopolitical conditions is in cyberspace. You actually get to see the early indicators of how things might turn or how things might adapt based on that. So we have lack of international norms, different behaviors. And I have a skew from our vantage point. When I look at and read all our forensic reports, nobody really hires FireEye's Mandiant group when they're 5 minutes behind the alert that creates the problem. They hire us when, I think you saw the number, 146 days or 149 days after the original breach. And that's because we're responding to the attacks that evade everybody's technology, evade their processes, evade their observation. So we're responding primarily to nation states. And so that's kind of my frame of reference when I'm talking here today, is firsthand knowledge and what other nations' capabilities are, or unknown people's capabilities are. I did make slides. I don't really know what they say, but it's fun to have them around anyway. I wanted you to have something to read every once in a while. I don't think cybersecurity has ever been more important. So I just said security breaches are inevitable. They're going to happen. And yet defending our networks has never been more important. And first reason why is you just look at the impact of some of the breaches we respond to. Somebody stole $81 million last February. And I know most of you think, wow, that's really cool. You can still steal $81 million and get away with it. That was my reaction to that. I think the Bank of Bangladesh doesn't appreciate my reaction. But at the end of the day, in today's world where we're all being surveilled all the time or surveyed all the time, we're always on camera, everything we do lasts forever on the internet. Wait, really? Somebody hacked in and stole $81 million. I think we clawed back $6 million of it. That's pretty amazing. So if you're going to, wherever money goes, crime follows. But think of the impact of that for the Central Bank of Bangladesh. It's pretty severe. Last night I was online, and well, they're a customer, so I won't say that one. That's the problem. I'm going through the impact of all these breaches and realizing all impressions for a company that's been breached are negative impressions, meaning every time they're in the press, they don't really like it. So that just ends that. But it's fascinating looking at the impact of these things. We have nation states out there that are hacking the rich, the famous, the influential, stealing their email and then posting it online. That's a fun thing to deal with. Second thing that makes it more important now than ever before, and I don't have a better word. I never like saying synergy, but there it is. I got that one out of the way. I don't like saying the word convergence, but it's exactly the right word when you look at technology right now. We have enterprise networks converging with the home, private networks, converging with the Internet of Things, converging with consumer technologies, and all of it is on the Internet. That's an amazing thing, because when you look at the private companies that do security, we're aligned with one or the other or the third thing. And we don't have this cohesive security fabric to defend all of it, but it's all converged. If you hack a corporate network, can you hack a device? Probably. A wearable? Maybe. It's going to be interesting to see that convergence. But what that means is all intrusions have a significant impact on our private lives, our work lives, and potentially on the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure around us. And then I keep thinking, so what comes next in cyberspace? Oh, I didn't know I had already gone to that slide. Not there yet, by the way. Not there yet. The third thing is, when you look at what makes it so important, is I feel, you know, from 1993 to 1998, when we responded to breaches, it was basically an attractive nuisance. It was .gov against .gov. I was in the military, so I have a skewed view, but that's what I witnessed. It was .mil against .mil, .gov against .gov. Fair fight, normal era. Every major intrusion was Unix machines. They were servers. They were internet-facing and mostly publicly available exploits. You know, criminal gets in there sooner or later. Right around 1997, 1998, I start responding more to criminal breaches. They're here to stay. There'll always be spray and pray attacks to break in. If you can be compromised, you will be compromised. We'll have to deal with that forever from the safe harbors. Somewhere around 2004, the third era started, where we started seeing the cyber espionage that we saw from China hitting our military suddenly pivot and hit the defense industrial base. We saw that topple over. Then they started hacking hedge funds, brick and mortars, any company doing mergers and acquisitions in China. I would argue the fourth phase started loosely starting in 2013, for me anyway, in my observables, when in August of 2013, there was the use of chemical weapons in Syria, and we had that bright red line was crossed. Anytime chemical weapons are used, we're going to kind of step in. What is it? Uh-oh, my clicker might not be working. We're done. No, and what I recognize then is the geopolitical ties to every single breach, because the minute we threatened armed combat in Syria, even though we didn't do it, we saw this thing called the Syrian Electronic Army kind of pop up. And I've got numerous discussions on that. So I am not on this slide either. So if we can go back to the no balance of power slide, we'll talk about that. I might as well at least talk about what's on the slides. And so what's going to come next on all this stuff? So we see the geopolitical conditions. We saw doxing, and we'll talk about the blurring of what Russia's doing in cyberspace. But I think the big concern is, there is no balance of power. We don't have a deterrence here. And what comes next is probably people getting compromised, an invasion of our very privacy by posting these emails that are being stolen anonymously and injecting spurious information. You know, we always were worried about the destructive attacks, and that's kind of bad. But whenever you go on offense and you're a bad guy, or you don't have the intent of the United States in your heart, you have negative and malintent, you want to hurt our economy, you want to invade our privacy, you want to steal our IP, and all those things are possible in cyberspace. And then fourth, you probably want to go destructive if you want to do so. But I'm worried about, first and foremost, if we don't find the deterrence, this escalation will continue, and it will continue to posting of documents that we just assume are true, and 99.99% of the stolen documents that are being posted are valid, but that 0.001% injects something that's false or spurious, and we have no idea how to determine the genuineness or authenticity of these documents. So that's where it's going to go next, and then I argue this privacy invasion of where it's going to go next. If you can anonymously steal information, you can anonymously post that information. We'll go to the no balance of power, because I think the no balance of power in cyber impacts the United States more negatively than any other nation. So what I mean by no balance of power is I just randomly came up with that because I was reading a Kissinger book, and that was his big thing, right? That you can avoid war in Europe because Europe fights every 50 years by having a balance of power between two equal powers and then two alignments, and then nothing happens. We simply don't have that in cyberspace for a couple of reasons. And one, it's because of our dependency on the internet for our communications, for our economy, for our businesses. And two, because you can attack us in ways that in a country where there's not a free press, the attack simply doesn't work. And we witnessed that for the first time, in my opinion, in 2016, when we saw private citizens' email stolen, like John Podesta, and then we saw those emails leaked online. And I've observed throughout my career firsthand CEOs or general counsel or folks who have lost their email to attackers, and those emails have been posted online. And it is an utter invasion of privacy, but we live in the one country where if your email gets stolen, the press is going to review it. Google is going to index it. Articles are going to be written against you. And if you're an elected official, you may have real trouble maintaining your career. So it's a fascinating thing that if I were going against the United States in cyberspace right now, what would I do? I'd target every elected official, every powerful, rich, or influential person, and I'd try to steal their email. I'd steal either for blackmail, for profit, or simply to ruin their careers. Simply to alienate the rich, powerful, and influential from the First Amendment folks. Because that's what will happen if we keep posting documents and writing articles. And, you know, there's a lot of people who saw rich people's emails or executives of a certain corporation's emails posted, and thousands of emails are posted, and we only remember like the negative ones, the two negative ones. So that's going to be a real challenge for us. And I thought about that when you saw Podesta's email getting posted, and you think, well, what do we do back? What are we going to do about it? What's our deterrence? Does it just stay in cyberspace? Do we come out of that domain? But you can see there's no balance of power. If we stay in the cyber domain, we're in the glass house, and we're stepping out of it and throwing rocks at a mud hut. If we steal Putin's email and post it online tomorrow, what do you think is going to happen to him? Nothing. It's not, no press over there is going to put it in the papers. It's not going to happen, right? So they have tools in their tool belt in Russia because of that no balance of power and the asymmetry of offense versus defense to add to that. That's going to be tough for us to deal with. Hence this conference, and hence why it's important, because I don't know if they're going to agree to any terms. So that's going to be a challenge. And then, you know, the no balance of power as well, when you look at it and see the asymmetry of offense versus defense, the fact that we have a free press and that you can invade our privacy in ways that are far more effective than if we can invade theirs or North Korea's. So they have extra tools at their disposal against us. You start looking at, let's imagine if all our deterrence is just in cyber domain. If all our offensive weapons were brought to bear against another nation, let's say Russia, and all their cyber weapons were brought to bear against us, and they were both effective, they win because of our dependency as well. So that's why I think one of my themes would be, whatever our deterrence is, it can't just be in cyberspace. The asymmetry is too vast for us right now. The challenge with that is the nations that are taking advantage of that asymmetry are less likely to comply with any international norms because of the advantages that they're getting from that. So there's no balance of power. Let's go on to the next slide. We skipped this slide. So I'm going to talk about Russia specifically because I can't help myself. I saw that, what was the movie where, I can't even remember it, where, you know, the Russians were invading the United States. It was an 80s after-school special. What was it called? Well, there's war games, but then there's one, there it is. Was it Red Dawn or whatever? It was really cool, and they started a group called the Wildcats or the Coyote. I can't remember what the name of the group was. The Wolverine, exactly, there we go. You remember all this. So you grow up during that era, you know, we win in 1980 in hockey, and everybody remembers celebrating that. You just can't help yourself, you know, Russia's at it again. But in my career, I've spent thousands of hours responding to these guys, and I just wanted to talk about some of the changes and how the conflict lines have blurred. And we saw these changes happen all in 2014. And I have the privilege, when we respond to a breach that has high impact, or you just like, wow, I've never seen anything like that, I get to fly in and get the tour and figure out what happened. And that happened in August of 2014. We were responding to a breach at a government agency, but it was the first time in my career with our observables that we saw that the Russian, we considered APT Group 28 had broken in. We attributed that to the Russian government, or Russian sanctioned. Can't tell you what building they're in, but they're Russian. And we've been tracking them for a long time. And when I say track, we just go where the breaches are, and they happen to breach a lot of organizations worldwide. And we're responding to the breach, but it was the first time they were letting us observe what they did. So when I was in the Air Force, and even after the Air Force, when I responded to Russia, when we responded, they would always go quiet. They wouldn't let us observe what they did. And it was kind of frustrating. We'd be like, oh, we know they hacked this Air Force base. Let's watch them. And we'd put our sniffy tool down and we'd watch their traffic, but it would be nothing there. So they didn't let us observe, orient, decide, and act. Suddenly in 2014, they did. And they could tell we were responding because the remedial drill philosophy at this organization was, if they intrude on a machine, play the whack-a-mole game. The minute we know they've got access to a machine, this, you know, APT Group 28, we're going to remediate the machine. We're going to take it offline, fix it, and get it back on. When you're playing whack-a-mole like that, it's pretty obvious to APT Group 28, and they respond to it. They came back every day. They allowed us to observe them. So that was one change we saw August, September of 2014. They let us observe them. Second, their counter-forensics got worse, and that was weird to me. And there's lots of, I'm not a mind reader, but my gut tells me that the Russian government started acting at a scale and scope where the discipline, the manual discipline of the operators got worse. They chose to not do counter-forensics. A couple examples of that, but I'll just give you one. A lot of their activities, if they're going to steal documents, they'll create a working directory, put all those documents in the working directory, rar them up, get them out, then delete the directory. Suddenly they stop doing that? That's a manual step. It's a manual step to cover your tracks so we don't know what they stole, what they were targeting. And the Russians are always kind of interesting. When they come in, you usually can tell what they're after because they're very specific. They go grab stuff. My observations when the Chinese broke in, and they always wore their Chinese jersey, it was easy to tell it was them. They do manual review usually when they're going through a victim machine to see what's interesting to them. The Russians don't do manual review. They tend to do recursive directory listings. They find what they're after, and they get the heck out of Dodge. It's a lot more economical of movement. So first thing, they let us observe them. Second thing, counter-forensics got different, less capable. Third, they hacked 2 universities that year. They hacked probably way more than that, but 2 that we responded to. And APT Group 28 or 29 took email from anti-Putin professors. And we saw the Chinese always operate that way. And I should caveat right around now, I'm not anti-Russia necessarily, and I'm not anti-China. We just go where the breaches are. And we noticed that the Russian government's taking the email of anti-Putin professors. I've seen them hack to steal IP, defense research. That made sense, but to steal the email of people just because they're anti your leader was something I hadn't seen personally. And then the fourth thing we started seeing in 2014, but in Eastern Europe, but not here, and our ISO folks did a great job covering this, we saw the doxing. APT 28 and APT 29 breaking in, and then suddenly whatever they stole during the computer intrusion would magically appear on an anonymous site somewhere, and then you'd have some people tweeting about it, and everybody would go look at it. So those 4 changes all happened in August, September of 2014. And realize the first time we responded to these folks was in 1995. So we had what is that? I can't do the math. 19 years of rules of engagement where we couldn't observe. They had great counter-forensics. They didn't dox. They didn't operate at a scale of taking anti-Putin email. And then all of a sudden, it all happens. What was happening in August, September? Ukraine and little green men. Crimea gets absolved. Fascinating times. So there was an escalation. The rules of engagement changed. And I think after 19 years of it not changing, that was somewhat interesting and alarming to me. So there is no balance of power. So what's the government going to do about it? Now, I wrote down oversimplified the role of government, and I look at things through the lens of private sector leadership, CEOs, that have been victims of computer intrusions. I kind of align with that. And what do they want from the government? First off, every U.S. citizen believes the government needs to defend itself. So first and foremost, the mission of government security, folks, is to support and defend their networks. Makes sense to me. And I think we can take care of that, and we'll always be working towards that, and that's the easiest part of our mission. But the second thing that CEOs want out there and the private sector wants from the government, and I would even say the general lay people would benefit from and all voters would benefit from, is we need a deterrence for cyber activities. And this is where things start to get really, really complex. This morning I got to meet with a bunch of reporters, and our marketing folks asked me, hey, just speak about what's top of mind. What's top of mind for me is, what are we going to do? We just had a nation hack us, steal the email of important and influential people, leak just portions of that. If I look out throughout my whole career, how many emails has the Russian government stolen? I think we've seen less than 1% of 1% of 1% of them. If they take the gloves off and escalate and start making this standard doctrine that what they steal, they post, this is going to be a significant issue. And at some point in time, I'm not a studier of diplomacy. I don't even know if studier is a word. But if it keeps escalating at some point in time, you got to display a deterrence or an unwillingness to let it go any further. And we've got to figure that out. It's a very complex thing. I got some ideas. I probably won't share them in a public forum. But got to have a deterrence, and I don't think it's in cyberspace. And I grew up in Pittsburgh. We oversimplify everything in Pittsburgh. You have to. If you're not talking football, you got to speak at the third grade level after that in Pittsburgh. No, I'm just kidding. No offense to Western Pennsylvania. But here's the reality. My overview, simplification of deterrence is there's two ways to deter: money, might. That simple. And we got to pick one of those tools or a blend of those tools. You have a sack of money over your shoulder or the 7th Fleet over your shoulder to figure out how do you deter things. And if neither of those will work, first you got to try it. But if neither of those work, we're going to have significant challenges. And I think we are going to have challenges with Iran. I don't think they're going to ideologically align with us tomorrow. I think we're going to have ideological challenges with North Korea. I don't think they'll align with us by tomorrow. And I think we may have that challenge right now with Russia. So it'll be fascinating to see that observed. To get deterrence right, so first, defend the government networks there. Second, be a way to impose deterrence against some of these state actors as well as criminal actors that are international, because both are a problem. And I think that's what most of America thinks about when they think about their government, is the government's here to defend us. So we got to get that right. But to have a deterrence, the third thing is you need attribution. If I were sitting in the Oval Office, I'd take nothing off the table to make sure we have positive attribution on every single cyber attack that happens against U.S. resources, period, whatever it has to be. Because you can't deter unless you know who did it. You have to have proportional response alternatives, and you have no idea where to direct that proportional response if you don't know who did it. We've got to get attribution right, and I think it's getting harder. I think modern nations are finding out a better way to cloud that. There was a time at the end of 2010 where when we were just mandating, we only had about 40 different buckets of threat groups. Every time we responded to a breach, it just filed nicely into one of 40 buckets. Now we have thousands of these things, and we have more nations emerging. So we have to get attribution right. And attribution has two benefits, by the way, and I always talk about this in D.C. Tonight I go to New York, I don't have to talk about attribution. But the first thing is for proportional response and deterrence. The second advantage of attribution, it actually helps the private sector when it comes to liabilities. If I'm a private sector CEO, and I get hacked by a drive-by shooting, and plaintiff lawyers accuse me of being negligent and irresponsible, I'm going to take my licks. But I want attribution by a government official if a cyber military attack happened against my company. Because I don't think we want to have a bar for all industry that is so high for cybersecurity that we expect the cupcake shop to prevent a cyber military attack. Or we just can't. Or a company that makes tires, should they be fair game for the best hackers in the world? So we got to sort this out. And as a nation, we're sending mixed signals here. And I'll give you an example. of a mixed signal when it comes to attribution. When Sony Pictures was compromised, the pendulum of public opinion went wildly towards that media and entertainment company was irresponsible and negligent in cybersecurity. President gets on TV, attributes the breach to North Korea, and suddenly the pendulum of public opinion, which does matter, swung to, wait a minute, North Korea sanctioned this attack against the media and entertainment company? And then you fast forward another year, OPM, Anthem, CareFirst, Primera, all these healthcare organizations were compromised by somebody. We at FireEye would attribute it to the Chinese government, and you don't hear a sound from the U.S. government. Where's the attribution? Clearly, it's a political decision. But if there was any attribution done then, it would have helped those victim companies deal with the 100-plus lawsuits they got. Second of all, attribution may be a deterrent, and I'm not saying attribution needs to poke a specific country in the face, but it is very useful for a company to say the government, with a high level of exactitude, said this was a nation-state sponsored attack. That goes a long way. But what we tacitly did to healthcare is we said they're fair game for espionage. They're fair game for any modern nation to choose to attack them. So now when I sit down with pharma and healthcare, I'm like, guys, I'm sorry. You can't just be compliant when it comes to cybersecurity, but our country expects you to withstand a cyber military attack. Not convinced that's the right posture for us to take as a nation. However, for you folks in the government, defending the government, I think that is the case. Whenever we assess how good an organization needs to be at security, we kind of look at the government as expected to withstand the most sophisticated attacks. You don't get that hall pass, and the cupcake company just might. So the role of government: defend government first, deter attacks against the government and the private sector, get attribution right, and I think all this is kind of related. The fourth is help develop international norms. I think they matter. I heard a speaker from Microsoft, great speaker, say international norms matter, and nobody really cared because it was a few years ago. But I was always in that corner, that at some point in time you'll see a loose or even formal alliance between nations that don't just offer anonymity, but they have a court system and a legal process where they have conditional anonymity. And all bad actors on the internet, anonymity can be pierced and there can be risks or repercussions. And then you're going to have countries that don't abide by those rules and norms. Over time, if we do security right, there should emerge a planet where countries that sit, or people that sit in countries that don't abide by these norms have very different internet experiences. They just do. We already see in the private sector, a lot of companies, it doesn't do any good, by the way, but a lot of companies will say, I block every IP address from Russia, okay? They'll just hack a third grade classroom in Mississippi, then hack you. But it's a start of a different internet experience. And it's going to continue and continue till 10 years from now. The countries that are the Wild West on the internet should have, if we do our jobs right, a very different experience when they go out to communicate. And their citizens, hopefully, will put pressure on those nations to change the tools and tactics they're using in cyberspace. So we got to get those norms done. I think it'll happen organically, but the government's probably the best representative to make that happen, and it is happening. There's work there. And then the last thing, or the fifth thing, and I oversimplify this, what is the government's responsibility during times of duress is we do need a shields up capability. And I've used an analogy for 10 years, and for those of you who heard me speak, you get to hear it again. For whatever reason, I pick on Wilkes-Barre Hospital. I don't even know if it exists. Wilkes-Barre or Wilkes-Barre, or however they say that town in northeastern PA. Let's imagine the following as a scenario, that the NSA or some intel officer has great intel that this Friday there will be a cyber attack against Wilkes-Barre Hospital. What do? What happens? Perfect answer, we're going to go shields up and protect the hospital. That we can impose our defensive will from the smartest people in the government and smartest people in the private sector to that hospital. What would actually happen today? We'd probably start moving people out of the damn hospital. If it was a credible threat against a known actor that's exceptionally good, that's what we'd do. We'd be like, we better get people out of it. We have no idea what's going to happen. And that doesn't work. I think the following is intolerable to the average voter. That a utility gets shut down, a hospital gets shut down, someone gets killed, and the intelligence existed before the attack somewhere in the government, but it couldn't be shared for whatever reasons. whether technology reason, legal reason, or just lack of will. We got to get that right. Sooner or later, there's going to be another war. I don't believe there will ever be world peace, but I'm not a scholar on the subject. But 15% of all people are born innately bad. I don't know if that's true either. I'm just spouting random statistics. But you get the idea that sooner or later there will be another conflict. We're already in several right now, by the way, and we just don't see as big a cyber component as there could be. But if we have one against a modern nation with a modern cyber capability, we're going to see things materialize. I actually believe today the best we see is about 70% of a nation state's capability, that they reserve another 10 to 15% for times of non-kinetic war but geopolitical tension. But the minute there's war, that's when we're really going to see 100% of the boundaries of capability. All gloves come off, and we're going to be like, wow, I didn't know they could do that in cyberspace. And a lot of the attacks we see in cyberspace, the attacks themselves have impacts that were not predictable, or even the remediation itself has impact that's not predictable. I'd advise all of you at your organizations, if you want to test what a cyber attack's impact could be, come off the internet for an hour during a workday and see what happens. Does your gate go up in the parking garage? Can people buy lunch that day, or does the point of sales not work? You get the point. Do doors even open because you're badging in and it might use the internet? The impact of these attacks will be unbelievably far-fetched. So during those times of duress, modern war, we are going to have to impose our will, probably going to have to figure out how do we do shields up with critical infrastructure first. And even there, unfortunately, we're probably going to have to prioritize. The Con Eds, the PG&Es, the Dominion Powers get massive amounts of help, and unfortunately, we may not get to every utility, but we have to have a shields up capability. Today, in my opinion, it does not exist, we don't have a lot of time to get that right. But we ought to get it right before we have no choice. So that's it. Defend, deter, attribution, get some norms, and at least be able to impose our will for shields up. And by the way, that's a Star Trek reference, blending Star Trek and Star Wars there. We got to do shields up in times of duress. But why just in times of duress? Why just critical infrastructure? I think that's what we start with, because those are the things that are most intolerable. I don't think the private sector expects to be protected from all things all the time. I think that blends privacy versus security in a way that we do different calculus. So operationalizing security is hard is my next conclusion. So we just described a lot of the challenges. Cybersecurity, there will always be breaches. Cybersecurity has never been more important. The impact of these breaches have never been more graver. The liability is never more. It's kind of frustrating. So what do we do about it? We're all sitting in ops centers with too many alerts, lack of expertise, products that just build moats, but the minute that moat is circumvented, nobody knows how to be helpful. We're hearing about machine learning, analytics, all these other things, but we ultimately feel we don't have the visibility we need to defend our networks, and we can't scale our experts. One of the things that FireEye is absolutely dedicated towards is the mission of relentlessly protecting you with innovative technology, but also, very important, with lessons learned on the front lines. There's a reason why we respond to every breach that matters. We have to have the intel from it, and we also want to make sure we innovate, and I think that's where security innovation starts, where people are actively evading the efficacy of our defenses. So we're going to get that right. You're going to be able to learn more about how to protect your networks, but I always framed security as we need network visibility, we need endpoint visibility. Unfortunately, we're going to have a different tech for email just because of the amount of attacks on it and the amount of throughput through it. And we need email visibility. But we need all those events to come to one place. And then we use the tools that are emerging now, the analytics, the heuristics, the machine learning, the threat data, maybe even threat context on top of the hits, so that our operators can make better decisions and they don't have to review 2 billion events a day. They only have to review the 6 that we think matter. And the whole security industry is building towards this. The ability to get better visibility easier, both endpoint and network, get it into, and you always hear the phrase data lake. Can't stand it, but there it is. That's the realities. And then you apply whatever technology or humans you need to figure out what's good, what's bad, what's working, what's not. And we'll get that right. And hopefully we have a demo booth out there, and you're going to see a lot of new technologies emerging. But I think you talk to any cybersecurity leader or any CEO of any company, that's how we're thinking about it. That we got to rely on these tools, machine learning and analytics, dynamic inspection, static inspection of files to determine if something's good or bad. And we're getting closer to making operationalizing your security easier. One of the takeaways, because I'm looking down and I realize that's not a counter, that's actually the time, so I'm already past my time, is I look at, so all of you are chartered with securing your networks. And I'll leave you with this, something that took me years to develop. I get to meet boards after something bad's happened usually. And CEOs always come up to me and say, hey, Mandy, how do we, how good are we? It's probably the number one question after a breach that a CEO has. How good's my team? How good are they? And it comes down to you're only as good as the person who's in charge of it. And you need that one throat to choke. So I always say, hey, sir or ma'am, whoever's running the company, you need one throat to choke for security, because if you distribute it too broadly with not one person at the head, certain responsibilities tend to leak through the cracks. That's just what I've observed. Another thing that we say is, and a lot of CEOs, they shouldn't have the technical knowledge to assess the capabilities of their team. So I'll say, well, here's 3 questions you can ask your CISO or whoever's in charge of security, where you don't have to care about the content of the answer. You only care that there is an answer. And I think these questions, I figured I'd share them with you. The first thing you should ask anyone who's in charge of security is, how would you break into us? Because they better be thinking that. I would imagine the Secret Service is always thinking, where would the shooter be when we move the president to this place? You have to be thinking, how would you break in? How would you evade? How would you maintain being surreptitious at your activities? So that's the first question I'd ask. And the answer has got to be something. Oh, I have no idea would be a bad answer. They either have to say, here's how, or here's who can tell me how. And that's a good answer. Second, okay, if that happened, how would we detect it? Because if you have no means to detect how people would break in, you're not even doing security. It's not. It's not going to work well for you. And then third, all security professionals should be thinking, what is worst case scenario if that break-in occurs? They have to be thinking that. Because I can assure you, and I have gotten the calls every once in a while, luckily they've been false alarms. Hey, FireEye's been breached. And the first thing I think is, what's worst case scenario? Period. What is the zone of potential outcomes? What's worst, and what can I hope for? And that's why context matters. I want to thank all of you for being here. I had a few more slides. I don't know if you saw them or not, but they were all really just there for you to read. And I'll get to chat with you later today. I was told I can't take questions till later today, so I look forward to that. Thank you for that, and I think we're on break now. Is that correct?
1 second.
All right. Thank you.